Hello everybody, Tommyruin here and welcome back to another video. Now earlier this year I made a video on the Execute Cleave build, Cleave, and it was all about attacking really fast and getting off loads of cleaves. And now that build used some special weapons from vanilla, and so far in the Burning Crusade has not been as successful as some people would have hoped. But there is a very different variant of that build called Felcleave. Now this one isn't your standard melee, strength, agi, DPS, whatever. This is a very specific type of metamorphosis DPS build that utilizes super fast haste and the Shadow Cleave attack and a random enchant that allows you to constantly be using your Shadow Cleave. So it's a really good dungeon spec because you do a lot of cleave damage, and I've also managed to get it doing some really high single target DPS, towards 5k even, so it's very competitive even in the single target environment. So without further ado, let's jump into the talents and abilities. So starting off, in the balanced Druid tree, we have got Lunar Guidance, and this increases your spell damage by 9% of your total intellect. Now, like I said, this isn't your typical strength agi build. This uses spell power instead to get your main bulk of your damage. So what you want to do is be wearing any gear really with intellect and spell power and really bumping up your spell damage. So we got Lunar Guidance here, and then I've also picked up Mark of the Wild in Restoration Druid. In Survival, I've picked up Feign Death so that you can reset your threat if needed. In Paladin, I've picked up Seal of Wisdom. Now, because we're going to be in melee range, we can use this so we can get some of our mana back when we are attacking. And because we're going to be attacking melee attacks most of the time, we can get a decent chunk of mana back with Seal of Wisdom. In the Protection tree, I've picked up Divine Shield because it's always good to be able to go immune every now and then, and it really does save your life when you need it. In the Retribution tree, I've got 3 out of 3 Fanaticism. Now this reduces your threat by 30% when you're not using Righteous Fury. So this is a really nice one. This build pumps a ton of threat, so it's a really good one to pick up. This one you could change out if you wanted to, but I like to have it as that extra safety net. In the Priest tree, I've picked up Inner Fire because that gives you some extra spell power. And then I've also picked up Fade so that it can reduce my threat again. In the Assassination Rogue tree, I've picked up Slice and Dice because we're going to be an attacking melee DPS build that relies on haste. We really want to increase our melee attack speed, so Slice and Dice is one we definitely want to pick up. I've also picked up Turn the Tables, so whenever someone in your party or raid blocks, dodges or parries, this will be your tank, an attack, your chance to critically hit with all combo point generators and melee haste is increased by 6%. So we get 6% increased melee haste for 8 seconds. And this is up basically all the time because your tank's going to be dodging, parrying, blocking, whatever, quite a lot. In this rogue tree, we've also got Hunger for Blood, which enrages us and gives us 5% increased damage. Now this requires a bleed on the target. We don't provide a bleed. We're just hoping that someone in our party does. If you know that you're going to be running with someone that doesn't have a bleed, then you can drop Hunger for Blood and get something else instead. In the Combat Rogue tree, I've picked up Improved Slice and Dice, which increases the duration of Slice and Dice by 50%, which is really big. It means we don't have to shift out of metaform to cast Slice and Dice, and it also increases the attack speed it grants by 6%. So that's a 6% increased attack speed on Slice and Dice, taking it up to 16%. Lightning Reflexes increases our melee haste by 6% again, so as you can see, there's a lot of melee haste amps here. We've got Mace Specialization, which increases our melee attack speed by 10% when we've got a mace equipped, and we do, and I'll show you which mace you want to go for later on in the video. We've got Blade Flurry, which increases our attack speed by 20% on a 2-minute cooldown, and our attack strike an additional nearby opponent, and this is insane for this build. It allows you to AoE cleave up to like 30k because your Felcleaves are affected by Blade Flurry, so that's really nice. In the Subtlety Rogue tree, I've picked up Vanish to reset threat again. Save Fool, as it's just a 1 AE ability that I needed to pick up. And we've also got Honor Amongst Thieves, which increases our chance to get a critical strike with all spells and attacks by 3%. So that's really nice, 3% crit. And it also grants us a combo point whenever we deal damage to the target. And this can occur every 3 seconds. And this is how we're going to be generating combo points to use Slice and Dice. Now, one thing that's worth mentioning is that Shadow Cleave, the ability that we get from being in Metamorphosis, scales off melee crit, not spell crit. Well, it also scales from shadow spell crit, a very specific type, but it also scales from melee crit. So anything that gives us melee crit is also a big buff. In the Shaman tree, I've picked up Magma Totem and Call of the Ancestors. I've also picked up Flame Tongue Weapon, which does a ton of damage because we're attacking so fast. And I've picked up Wind Fury Totem. And then in the Talent tree for enhancement, I've picked 3 out of 3 elemental weapons to increase the spell damage on our Flame Tongue Weapon. We've got Flurry to increase our attack speed when we deal a critical strike. And we've got improved Wind Fury Totem to increase our melee haste by 6% with a Wind Fury Totem. So that also gives 16% melee haste. Right, in the Warlock tree, I've picked up Corruption because we can cast it whilst we're cleaving. Cleave is off the global cooldown. It's a next melee attack, so Corruption can be used and we can also cleave at the same time. So instant casts are really nice. We've got Life Tap to increase our mana when we need it. We've got Drained Soul so that we can pick up any demon pet, but I like to choose the Felguard in this build, but you can use it to pick up any demon pet. In the Demonology Warlock tree, we have got 5 out of 5 Master Demonologist with a Felguard. So this increases all damage done by 5% and reduces all damage taken by 5%. You could go for the Succubus if you wanted, which increases your shadow damage by 5% and your shadow crit by 5%. I prefer the Felguard. I found that its damage is so much higher, about 8% of my total damage higher when I do a pass. My Felguard's doing 10% and my Succubus only does about 2 to 3. On top of that, it's also increasing all damage we do, and in Metamorphosis we get access to Immolation Aura, which is a really high damage fire ability, and we've also got our Flame-Tongued weapons doing quite a lot of damage. So Felguard buffs all of those damage types, whereas Succubus only buffs the Shadow Cleave. And although Shadow Cleave is the main part of our build, getting 5% extra crit on that is quite nice. I think the Felguard damage that you gain outweighs that, and also the buff to the other spell schools will outweigh that as well. We've got Demonic Empowerment, which with talents and random enchants is on a 32-second cooldown, and it increases our Felguard's attack speed by 20%. Now, I wouldn't choose this if I had the Succubus, but because I've got the Felguard, I've picked this one up. We've got Demonic Knowledge, which increases the spell damage equal to 15% of our active demon's intellect. So this one's quite nice. It gives us a big spell damage increase. We've got Felguard, obviously. We've got Nemesis, which reduces the cooldown of Demonic Empowerment and Metamorphosis by 30%. We've got Demonic Pact, which increases our fire and shadow spell damage done by 5%, and our Summon Demon's critical strikes apply the Demonic Pact effect to all party and raid members. Now, Demonic Pact increases our spell power by 5% of our spell damage for 45 seconds. So if you have a lot of spell damage, this gives you a big chunk of spell power, which is really, really nice. And then we've got Metamorphosis, and this unlocks a whole host of abilities. We get to be in demon form, mostly, and you can do a demon charge, you've got a Shadow Cleave, and you've got an Immolation Aura, as well as being able to use all your other Warlock spells. In the Destruction tree, I picked up Shadowburn. This one is really hit or miss. You don't have to take it. I like it because it allows me to generate soul shards if I need them, and it's also free damage because we can cast it when we are shadow cleaving as well. Now in the Warrior tree, in Fury, we've got 5 out of 5 in Rage, and this is because it increases our physical damage by 10% and our melee haste by 10% when we are using Berserker Rage and Blood Rage. So we use Blood Rage as part of our build, and we use this for the random enchant. I'll go into that in a bit. But we are going to be using Blood Rage all the time, so we're going to constantly have 10% melee haste from Enrage. Intensify Rage allows us to do that because it reduces the cooldown of Blood Rage by 33%. And we've got Rampage for the 5% melee crit. And then, like I said, we have got Blood Rage. For the spec, we're going Int for the stat allocation because it gives us increased spell damage from our intellect. Now let's look into the random enchant. So first of all, we have got Demonic Influence. This allows you to be in Metamorphosis 100% of the time. It also increases the damage that our demons do by 50%, which is why I'm going with the Felguard, because it really amps its damage up. And then our demons also generate 3000 mana over 30 seconds. So it reduces our metamorphosis cooldown by 50%, but it also reduces the bonus damage granted by 15%. So in total, metamorphosis now only gives a 5% damage boost, which is still really nice. But this RE is essential because it allows us to be in metamorphosis 100% of the time. We've also got Demonic Rage as a epic random enchant, and this reduces the cooldown of our Blood Rage by 50%. And using Blood Rage while in metamorphosis puts you in a Demonic Rage for 30 seconds. And whilst this is active, our Shadow Cleave has no cooldown and our physical damage taken is reduced by 10%. But we lose 2% of our health every second. So there's some big drawbacks here. We're losing 2% of our health every second, but we can Shadow Cleave on no cooldown. And like I said, this is a on next melee attack ability. So if we're meleeing really fast, we can constantly be using this. And I've got my melee attack speed down to like 0.4. And that means you're doing just about over 2 Felcleaves or Shadow Cleaves a second, and these can crit up to 4k, or I've found them to crit up to 4k, so you can see where the damage comes from. We've also got in the epic slot Counterpoise. Now, whilst above 50% rage, you receive 5% melee haste, while below 50% rage, you receive 3% melee crit. Now, this spec doesn't have a rage spender, so we're constantly going to be generating rage from our melee attacks, and we're always going to be above 50% rage. So we're going to constantly have a 5% melee haste buff from this when we go into combat, which is really nice. It constantly is adding to that haste amp, which we're really looking for. We've got 3 out of 3 on the Nemesis random enchant. Now this is what is the final piece of the puzzle that allows us to stay in metamorphosis for the whole time, and it also reduces our demonic empowerment cooldown as well, so our demon can constantly be in demonic empowerment. We have also got Darkness, which increases our shadow damage by 2%, Lunar Guidance, which increases our spell damage by 2% of our total intellect. I also use 3 out of 3 elemental weapons to increase the passive effect of our flame tongue weapon, so that gives us more spell power. I've got Precision, which increases our chance to hit with all spells and attacks by 2%. I also use 3 out of 3 improved Slice and Dice, which increases the duration of our Slice and Dice by 25% and our bonus attack speed by 2%. So I think in total our Slice and Dice gives us 22% increased melee attack speed, which is pretty huge. So for this spec, there are a few macros which I will put in the description that you should really look at getting. One of them is to macro Blood Rage into Metamorphosis, because it allows you to stay in Metamorphosis for as long as possible and maintain that uptime of Blood Rage. Not only this, but I found it really helpful when I'm trying to refresh Slice and Dice, because if Metamorphosis is on cooldown and if Blood Rage is on cooldown, when you pop back into Metamorphosis and you use Shadow Cleave, you're going to incur that 6-second global cooldown because you're not Blood Raged and you haven't got that debuff that Demonic Rage gives you. What you also want to do when you go into combat, you want to be using Immolation Aura on cooldown. It's a hefty chunk of mana to cost this. It's 1.5k mana, but it does so much damage every second for 10 seconds. It's so worth pressing, even on single target. And then what you want to be doing is Shadow Cleaving. I use Shadow Burn on cooldown. It just gives that extra damage that you wouldn't get otherwise. And I try and keep up Corruption. Now, you want to maintain Slice and Dice as long as possible. It should be fairly easy with the improved Slice and Dice REs and talents that you have. It should really increase the duration so that it's something that you only have to manage once every 40 seconds or so. You've got Life Tap to maintain your life whenever possible. And then you're using Blade Flurry on those big packs of mobs or on cooldown on bosses, because it's something that you really want to keep up. You also have your Magma Totem, which you can place down on single target as well. It's just that extra free damage that you wouldn't normally get when you're just Shadow Cleaving. And obviously, if you've got a bleed in the group, you want to be keeping up Hunger for Blood. So the weapons that I'm using for this spec currently are the Runesong Dagger in my main hand. Now this drops from Shattered Halls, and the reason I'm using this over the Blade of the Archmage or the Thralmar equivalent that is the Reputation Sword is because of the attack speed. Now the Runesong Dagger, for a drop in about 30 spell power, you're gaining 0.3 second increased attack speed, which is really, really big. You want that attack speed, so I'm using the Runesong Dagger. I found it to be better. It also has very nice stats, so it's something that you should look at getting if you want to play this build. Now in my offhand, I have got the Blackout Truncheon. This mace drops from Shadow Labs, and it is really nice because it has a haste proc, and it's also a mace, so it gives you the ability to use mace specialization, which we went over in the talents. Not only that, it also has 2 sockets, so it's a really good mace to have, and you can put it in your offhand so that you can use a spell power main hand weapon. And yeah, it just is so beneficial because you've got those sockets, you've got a mace for the mace spec, and it also has the haste proc, so it kind of fits the build there really for this build. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It's something that I'm having a ton of fun playing when I'm not being asked to tank. Let me know what you think about this build down in the comments section. I'm particularly interested with this one because it's such a fun and new way of playing a demon form build. Also, let me know if you can think of a third epic random enchant that I could use for this build, because I currently don't use one and I feel like I'm missing a trick there. So definitely fill me in on that one. But thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all very soon.